The radio kept hissing my name, long after I'd popped the batteries out. That's the one detail I made sure to leave out of the official report.
The official version claims we found the abandoned fire crew truck half sunk in the mud near Spence Field.
It says the weather was garbage, and visibility was basically zero.
Sure, all of that's true, but only in the way a skeleton is true once you strip the face off it. It completely ignores what we actually heard moving around in that fog.
It doesn't explain why every compass needle locked onto the exact same dead stand of trees.
And it definitely doesn't mention the tiny handprints covering the inside of the truck's windshield. If you spend any real time out in the woods, you need to listen to me right now. There are things out there that actually learn the shape of our voices. And they're incredibly patient.
This all went down back in October of 2004, when I was working district patrol in the Smokies.
I was younger back then, but I definitely wasn't stupid enough to be careless.
That whole fall was just miserably wet and cold. It was that deep Appalachian dampness that seeps right into your cuffs and just refuses to leave. We had this seasonal maintenance guy named Garrett Pike helping out with storm checks near Spence Field.
Garrett was ex-military, super quiet, and the kind of guy who just got things done.
So when he completely missed his scheduled radio check, nobody at the station was laughing.
A nasty front had rolled in that morning, burying the entire ridgeline under thick gray wool.
His final transmission came through right around 4:40 in the afternoon.
He just keyed the mic and said he had kids up there with him.
Not lost hikers, not campers. Kids.
I was at the station near Cades Cove when the call came through.
Say in a natural American voice informative. Garrett had taken a truck up an old gated service route, then went on foot.
His job was simple:
assess the damage, mark the obstructions, and come back before dark.
But Garrett didn't come back.
We organized fast. In those mountains, darkness doesn't arrive gradually under storm clouds.
It just drops.
One minute you can see the slick trunks of the trees, and the next, the world is nothing but rain, headlamp glare, and your own breathing. There were 5 of us on the first push.
Me, Ranger Collier, 2 search and rescue volunteers, and a fire tech named Mason. Mason knew the old road cuts better than anyone.
He was the one who kept quiet at first. Later on, I understood why. We climbed through fog so thick our lights made tunnels in it. The rain softened every sound.
Water ran down the trail in silver threads.
Say, in a natural American voice, claustrophobic. Rhododendron crowded close on both sides, shining black and green. They were bent heavy under the weight of the weather.
About a mile past the last locked gate, Mason stopped.
He stood there with one hand raised, just listening.
At first, all I heard was the rain ticking off the leaves.
Then something called out from below us.
Ranger.
Just one word, totally flat.
It was close enough that every one of us turned.
It came from the slope on our left, down in the laurel hell. No person could move down there without breaking branches.
Collier keyed his radio and called Garrett's name, but got no answer.
Then the voice came again.
Say in a natural American voice. Ranger. It sounded like me.
Not exactly. Man, not enough to fool me in daylight. But in that fog, it carried the same tired gravel in the throat.
Say in a natural American voice. Chilling realization. It had the exact same clipped way I answered when visitors called from a distance.
Say in a natural American voice, observing fear. Mason looked at me then, and his face had just gone slack.
I asked him what was wrong. He looked at me and said, "That's what it did before."
Nobody spoke after that. Finding a clue, we found Garrett's first marker flag 20 minutes later. It was tied properly around a striped maple sapling. Then we found another, and another.
Each one led us away from the drainage he was supposed to check.
They were leading us deeper toward a narrow fold of land north of Spence Field.
right where old manways and animal trails braid together under the blowdowns.
Say, in a natural American voice, "At the fourth flag, Collier crouched down and touched the knot."
He looked up and said, "This isn't his." It was the same orange survey tape we used, but the knot was wrong.
Garrett tied square knots.
This one was looped and twisted.
Say in a natural American voice, chilling realization, like someone had copied the idea without understanding the reason.
We kept finding those weird flags leading us deeper.
Usually, you don't let a missing guy dictate the search if his trail makes zero sense.
But when the woods try to show you something, you gotta look.
The fog got thicker the higher we climbed, and it wasn't acting right.
It didn't drift or roll like normal mist.
It just hung there in these weird vertical bands, holding perfectly still while the rain poured right through it. Every few minutes, the radio would just crackle with static.
But underneath all that noise, you could hear something else. It was breathing. Slow, wet breathing, like someone was right up against the mic.
Just after 6, Garrett finally came over the radio.
His voice was barely there, telling us not to come up by the bald.
Collier jumped right on it, asking for his location and if he was hurt. Garrett took forever to answer back. When he did, he just said there was more than one trail. Then, right before the radio clicked off, we heard it. A little kid, laughing in the background. Mason reached up and snapped his headlamp off right away.
He leaned in, whispering that we needed to turn back right now.
Standing there in the freezing rain, he finally spilled what he'd left out of his report.
3 days before Garrett went missing, Mason heard a little girl crying in the woods.
He went in and found a perfectly dry blue mitten on a stump.
Then, a kid's voice right behind him asked if he knew the way home.
He said he spun around, but nobody was there.
But then something in the bushes repeated the exact same question.
And it wasn't just any voice. It was his mom's voice, exactly how she sounded before she died 9 years ago. He admitted he ran all the way back to his truck in a panic.
He kept his mouth shut because he didn't want to be a joke to the other guys.
But now Garrett was gone, and the woods were using our own voices against us.
We really should have turned around right then. I know that now.
But we kept pushing into the dark, 'cause Garrett might have been bleeding out.
And honestly, none of us wanted to admit something impossible was happening on our watch.
The trail narrowed into a slick seam between the laurel and hemlock.
Our GPS units started jumping all over the place.
1 second we were near Spence Field, then half a mile east.
Then they just flashed blank coordinates.
We pushed through the brush until we found something in the mud.
It was Garrett's pack, shoved under a fallen yellow birch.
Seeing it there sent a cold spike of dread right through us.
He wouldn't leave his gear behind. We knelt in the freezing rain and opened up the soaked canvas.
Inside, we found his work gloves, a folded map, and a couple of protein bars.
Tucked underneath all that was his Greenfield notebook. I flipped open the notebook, trying to shield the pages from the rain.
The last page was completely covered, filled edge to edge with the exact same sentence.
It read, "It walks where the fog touches both sides of the trail."
You could see the panic in his handwriting. Say, in a natural reflection, at the top, the letters started out neat and disciplined, but by the bottom, they slanted hard and erratic. He had pressed down so hard the pencil actually tore right through the damp paper.
Collier grabbed his radio and pressed the button hard.
He called out, telling Garrett we had his pack and asking him to give us a sound. We all just stood there, freezing in the downpour, straining to hear anything.
The answer didn't come over the radio.
From the thick fog right in front of us, we heard 3 sharp knocks.
It wasn't wood hitting wood. Say, in a natural American voice, chilling realization. It was a hard clack, exactly like knuckles tapping against thick glass. The sound was so wrong out there that Mason just started backing away. Before we could stop her, one of the volunteers yelled Garrett's name into the trees.
Her voice echoed for a second, but the rain swallowed it up.
The fog answered her almost instantly, repeating his name in her exact voice. Then it called out again, this time sounding just like Collier. Finally, it used my own voice.
Say in a natural awe. Each time it spoke, the sound moved to our right, circling us.
We formed a tight circle, facing outward with our lights cutting into the mist. The rain started coming down harder, and the branches around us were shaking. Somewhere below us, it sounded like the creek itself had gotten up and started walking.
That was when we saw the first child.
He stood between two trees about 30 yards upslope.
He was small, maybe 8 or 9, with dark hair plastered flat.
Just standing barefoot in the freezing mud, his face was turned slightly away from us. The headlamp only caught the curve of his pale cheek and one ear.
Erin, one of our volunteers, broke the circle.
She took a single, hesitant step toward him.
As soon as she moved, the child stepped backward. But he didn't lift his feet. He just slid. It was this smooth, completely unnatural motion. Say in a natural American realization, like he was being pulled backward on an invisible string. Collier shouted for him to stop. The boy turned his head just a little more toward us. But it wasn't enough to see his face. It was never enough. Then Garrett's voice came from directly behind us.
He sounded terrified.
He said, "Please don't let them in the truck." We all spun around, our light sweeping the woods. But there was absolutely nothing there. When we whipped our heads back around to look upslope,
The boy was gone.
the space between the trees was completely empty.
There was nothing left but the falling rain and that shifting silver fog.
We moved up to the spot where he'd been standing. We aimed our lights down at the ground. Grim discovery. There were footprints in the mud. Small, bare, clear prints pressed deep into the soaked earth.
But as we studied the tracks, my stomach dropped.
Say in a natural American voice, every single footprint was facing toward us. Not away. Chilling realization. Toward us.
Like he'd been walking right at us the whole time.
We found the truck at 7:03, which should have been impossible. Garrett parked way lower, near the old road. But somehow we came out on a ridge above it,
Looking down at the white roof reflecting our lights.
The driver's side door was hanging wide open.
the interior light was completely dead.
The only sound was the relentless rain tapping against the metal hood.
And the windshield was completely fogged over from the inside. At first glance, I honestly thought the glass was just cracked in this huge spiderweb pattern. But as I got closer, my stomach just dropped. The whole windshield was covered in handprints. Dozens of them, pressed from the inside? We shined our lights right through the open door, bracing ourselves. But there weren't any kids in there. And there was no sign of Garrett either.
Just his radio, sitting on the passenger seat, transmitting into the dark.
Collier reached in and picked it up with 2 fingers, like it was a dead animal. He turned it over in the light. The battery pack was completely gone. Say in a natural American realization. It had no power source, but it was still on. The broken radio just kept breathing out this slow, wet static into the freezing air. We all stood there frozen, listening to it. Then, clear as day, it spoke in my exact voice. It just said, "Found him." Aaron let out this short, broken scream that just vanished into the rain. Something moved in the back seat. It wasn't a clear shape. It was more like the darkness back there just folded inward on itself. Out of that dark pocket, a small hand came up. It was wet, with mud packed under the nails.
It pressed slowly against the inside of the rear window.
Then another hand appeared.
And then another.
The whole heavy truck rocked once on its suspension, like something huge shifted inside.
Say in a natural American voice, urgent action. Panic took over and Mason fired his flare right into the mud.
This blinding red light just exploded through the fog. For a second, the whole slope looked like it was burning.
As the flare hissed in the rain, the red glare lit up a figure standing behind the tailgate.
It was Barrett. He was facing away from us, staring dead into the trees.
Say in a natural American detail, he didn't have a coat and his shirt was soaked completely black. He was standing so unnaturally still, with his arms just hanging at his sides.
Say in a natural American voice, the unnerved detail. The freezing rain was pounding him, but he wasn't even shivering.
Collier yelled his name over the store.
But Garrett didn't turn around.
Before we could even move toward him, these whispers started coming from inside the empty truck. Just little breaths, like kids whispering when they know they're in trouble. Then one sentence rose up above the rest. A kid's voice said, "Ask him what he carried out."
Garrett slowly turned his head toward us.
Just his head.
His body stayed rigid, facing the dark trees. In the harsh red light, his face looked entirely wrong. It was completely emptied, his eyes open way too wide. His mouth moved stiffly before any sound actually came out. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and hollow. "I didn't carry it out," he said. The words barely cut through the hiss of the freezing rain. Beside me, Mason suddenly collapsed, dropping heavily to his knees in the thick mud. He stared at Garrett with absolute terror.
I heard him whisper, his voice trembling. "Oh God, he found the box."
That was the missing piece, the part that never made it into any official file. Years earlier, a trail crew found a small, weathered wooden box wedged under some stones in a collapsed springhouse. Inside that ancient box was a chilling collection of macabre items. There were faded bone buttons, tiny white teeth, and small braids of hair tied with brittle thread. Say in a real warning, they were told to leave it alone. But according to Mason, one of the crew members took it anyway, carrying it down the mountain as a joke. That man died later that winter in a car wreck outside Maryville.
After his death, strange reports started flooding in.
Hikers heard children crying near closed trails, and rangers found small, bare footprints around locked buildings. Chilling realization, voices began echoing over the radios long after dark. The box was supposedly returned to the woods eventually, but nobody knew exactly where.
Nobody ever talked about it. But standing there in the freezing rain, the horrifying truth settled over us.
Say, in a natural American voice, Garrett found it. The flare hissed violently as the rain pounded against it. Behind Garrett, the truck's windows fogged even heavier. The dozens of small handprints began sliding down the glass from the inside, losing their strength. Without another word, Garrett took one slow step toward the pitch-black trees. Collier immediately moved to go after it. Acting on pure instinct, I grabbed Collier's pack strap and hauled him back. I held onto his pack strap with everything I had. That split-second decision is probably the only reason I'm still alive today. But it might be the reason Garrett isn't. Because the second Collier stopped moving, the woods went dead silent. No rain, no creek, no radio static. Just a crushing, heavy quiet. The silence pressed against my ears so hard my jaw actually ached. We just stood there frozen in the red glare, waiting.
Then the forest finally spoke.
It was Garrett's voice, but it was coming from everywhere at once. It just asked, "Which one of you opened it?" Down in the mud, Mason slowly pushed himself up to his feet. He didn't look at us, and he didn't even glance at the truck. He just stared straight past Garrett.
right into the pitch-black trees. All the terror in his face was gone.
He just looked completely, unnervingly calm.
He stood there for a second in the freezing rain.
And then he said, "I saw where they put it back."
His voice had this strange, heavy relief to it.
Like a man who finally knew how a nightmare was going to end.
Without waiting for us to answer, he started walking forward.
Panic flared at my chest when I realized what he was doing.
Desperate action, I reached out and grabbed the wet sleeve of his jacket, trying to hold him back.
But Mason didn't fight me. He just pulled his arm free. He did it so gently. Kind of like a man politely leaving a room.
Collier started shouting orders for him to stop.
Behind me, Aaron let out a sharp cry, and the other volunteer just started sobbing.
But Mason ignored all of it.
He just kept walking steadily through the deep mud.
He didn't stop until he reached Garrett's side.
For a long, agonizing moment, the two men just stood there, side by side.
Say in a natural American voice, both of them were facing that impenetrable wall of trees.
Their backs were completely turned to us and the truck.
The red flare cast these long, distorted shadows into the woods.
Haunting realization. It made them look like they were already part of the forest.
The silence held them there, in this heavy, expectant pause.
Then Garrett slowly raised one arm.
He pointed his hand deeper into the dark woods.
Beside him, Mason didn't say a word.
Say, in a natural American voice, chilling acceptance. He just gave a single, slow nod of understanding.
They walked into the trees together. The thick, unnatural fog rolled over them almost immediately.
It swallowed them up in less than 5 steps. We just stood there, completely paralyzed, watching the darkness take them.
We didn't follow.
Call it cowardice or wisdom, but we stayed put.
The clearing felt impossibly empty without them.
Suddenly, the broken radio on the passenger seat clicked once.
A child's voice whispered through the speaker.
It said, "One came back wrong."
And then the flare hissed and died, plunging us into absolute darkness.
As soon as that flare died, we just ran.
No formation, no procedure, no dignity.
We were just crashing blindly through the pitch-black woods.
Slipping down these steep, muddy slopes we hadn't even climbed to get there.
We were tearing our hands and faces on the laurel branches.
Just scrambling in the absolute dark. And right behind us, the fog started calling out.
Using voices we actually knew.
I heard Garrett and Mason calling for us.
But then, it got worse.
I heard my own dad's voice out that.
Aaron's sister Terror.
And Collier was shouting orders from places he wasn't even standing.
At one point, I risked looking back over my shoulder.
I saw these lights following us through the trees.
They weren't headlamps, though.
They were small, low to the ground, bobbing in a line. It looked exactly like kids carrying candles through the rain.
We didn't stop running.
Not until we finally hit the locked gate just before midnight. Only 4 of us came out of those woods.
The second search kicked off right at dawn.
We had way more people and better gear. Everyone had that false confidence that daylight always brings. Like the sun somehow makes the woods safe.
They found the truck exactly where Garrett originally parked it, way lower down on the service route.
The glass was totally clean. No handprints.
No broken radio on the seat either.
It was like it never even moved.
Garrett Pike was never found.
But 3 days later, they actually found Mason near Abrams Creek.
He was alive, but severely hypothermic. Just sitting on a rock with both of his boots missing.
Say in a natural American voice, serious. Mason wouldn't speak a single word for almost a week.
When he finally did, he just gave the investigators a standard statement.
He claimed he got separated in the fog and wandered downhill. That's the official story he signed.
But one night, right before he quit and moved out west, Mason showed up at Lycadam.
He was just standing out on my porch in a clean shirt,
looking like he'd aged 10 years.
I asked him who they wanted.
He didn't even look at me.
He just stared right past my shoulder, into the dark tree line.
His face looked so pale in that yellow porch light.
Then he finally answered me.
He said, "Whoever hears them next."
I've been retired for 6 years now. I live far from the Smokies, or at least I tell myself it's far.
I don't hike in the fog, and I definitely don't keep old radios around.
But every October, when the air gets wet and the leaves start rotting, it all comes back.
I still wake up before dawn. And I swear, I can hear radio static.
Last year, it got worse.
I woke up during a bad storm and walked into the kitchen.
I looked out the back door and saw fresh mud on the porch.
I stepped out into the cold to get a better look.
The porch light caught a trail of small footprints.
They came right up the steps. My heart was hammering in my chest.
The prints were perfectly clear in the dark mud.
They were a child's footprints, and they were completely bare.
I followed the path with my eyes, feeling sick to my stomach.
They didn't wander off or turn around.
Absolute terror. Every single print was facing inward.
I slowly backed away, staring at the kitchen window.
The glass was just cold and dark, but I knew something was waiting right there.
I forced myself to look at the bottom of the glass.
Pressed against the outside, smeared in mud, were 5 small handprints.
Just waiting for me to turn on the light.